Yo, what's going on, guys? Durkamaster here, and we're doing another Durka Deck Tech where we take a look at one of my commander decks and go over how I personally choose to build and play them. And the one we're looking at today is Svella Ice Shaper. This is a 3-mana commander, 1 red-green. It's a legendary snow creature, which is relevant. It's a troll warrior. It's got 2/4 for power and toughness. And it says pay 3 mana and tap, create a colorless snow artifact token named Icy Manalith. And they have the ability to tap to add 1 mana of any color. And they also have the second ability, pay 8 mana, 6 red-green, tap, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest at the bottom in a random order. So it's got a way to ramp itself into other things as well as its own ability. And one of the main goals of the deck, what we are trying to ramp into, is none other than Primal Surge. This is the only non-permanent card in the deck. For 10 mana, this sorcery, 8 green, says exile the top card of your library. If it's a permanent, you may put that card onto the battlefield. If you do, repeat this process. So, unlike Svella, whose second ability says you may cast that spell, this one says put it directly into play. Both of these are fairly relevant because you get all your cast triggers from Svella's trigger, but you do not with Primal Surge. Now, in this case, because this is the only not permanent card in the deck, it means as many times as we like, we can take the top card of our library and put it directly into play. All of our permanents, all of our creatures, all of our lands, all of our enchantments, all of our artifacts, all of it. Now, what are we going to do with that? Well, ideally, when we put everything into play, we'll have things like Warstorm Surge. This is a 6-mana enchantment. It says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So you put a creature into play and kapew, you shoot somebody in the head. And if you put all your creatures into play, they're all going to shoot quite a bit. It goes kind of nutty. And then the other one is Endray's Forerunners. This is an 8-mana creature, 5 green, for a 7/7 boar with vigilance, trample, and haste. And whenever it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain vigilance and trample until end of turn. So there's lots of big beefy boys in the deck. You make them bigger and tramply. And worst case scenario, they have vigilance so they can block if you don't get the job done right away. Now, what are we going to do once we put all these things into play? If we have all these creatures and we don't get the job done with Warstorm Surge right on the spot, well, we have a handful of different haste enablers. So we have things like Rhythm of the Wild, 3-mana enchantment, 1 red-green, and creature spells you control can't be countered. Non-token creatures you control have Riot, meaning when they enter the battlefield, they enter with either a +1 counter or they get haste. In this case, we're always going to choose haste. And we have Urabrask the Hidden. This is a 5-mana legendary Praetor, Phyrexian Praetor. 4/4 creatures you control have haste. Creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Then we have the Hammer of Purphoros. This is a 3-mana, 1 red for a legendary enchantment artifact. Creatures you control have haste. And it also has the nifty little ability, pay 3 mana, 2 and a red, tap it, sacrifice a land. Put a 3/3 colorless golem enchantment artifact creature token onto the battlefield. Not super relevant, but handy in a pinch. Then we also have our good friend Samut. This is a 4-mana planeswalker for 2 and then 2 hybrid mana of red-green, meaning you can pay either red or green for either of these pips. Samut Tyrant Smasher is 5 loyalty. Most importantly, creatures you control have haste. Also has the ability to -1. Target creature gets +2/+1 and gains haste until end of turn. And you also scry 1. Pretty much you just give them haste with the static ability though. And then lastly, for the haste enablers, we have Purphoros Bronze Blooded. This is a 5 mana legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible, and as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, it's not a creature, meaning the red pips in the mana cost of the creature. Most importantly, it says other creatures you control have haste. Also, it says you can pay 3 mana, and you may put a red creature or artifact creature card onto the battlefield from your hand. Sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. So it has to be a creature. It has to either be red or an artifact. Now, that's what we do to make sure that when we get our Primal Surge done, they don't just sit there for a turn. They can immediately affect the board. But what do we do if we can't do the Primal Surge strategy? Well, we have Sarkhan's Unsealing. This is a 4 mana enchantment. It says, whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4, 5, or 6, this deals 4 damage to any target. And if you cast a creature spell with power 7 or greater, this deals 4 damage to each player and each creature and planeswalker they control. Now, this deck has a lot of big beefy boys, and our commander has this second ability, which says Cast. So this will actually trigger the Sarkhan's Unsealing. However, Primal Surge does not, because this has put into play, it does not say Cast. So this is mainly to combo with our commander, plus all the lands and mana rocks that are going to help us cast spells. Now, one of the things that's really nice about this deck is that we have a lot of untappers to keep using that ability on Spella. One of which is Rime Tender. This is a 2 mana creature. It's a 2/2 human druid. It says tap this to untap another target snow permanent. As we noted, the commander and the mana rock that they make are snow permanents, as well as the land that we have that's a snow permanent. Ideally, we'd probably have our basics be snow as well, but for budget purposes, we don't. And then we have the lovely Sereth, the Viper's Fang, 4 mana, 2 green for a legendary human warlock. It's a 3/4. There's other creatures you control. Other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch. Other untapped creatures you control have Hexproof. Fairly relevant. It says pay 1 mana and tap to untap another target creature or land you control. Meaning, once you use Spella for the ability, if somebody targets it, you can pay 1 and tap this to untap it, and not only does it have Hexproof, but it's ready to use one of those again. And then we have one of the cards that I didn't know existed before I started looking into this deck. Instill Energy. For 1 green, this enchantment basically says you may untap target creature one time your turn. That's it. Pay 0 and untap a creature. Activate only once a turn. That's effectively what it says. Untap this creature, I guess it is, because it's an aura. Actually, you should have pulled up the Oracle text for it or something. But the point is, once a turn, you can untap the creature that's enchanted. We're going to put that on Spella to activate to keep putting mana rocks out more than once a turn. And then sometimes we're going to be untapping all of our lands. This is Wilderness Reclamation. It's a 4 mana enchantment. It says, at the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. Great way to get a bunch of things out, and then untap all those lands to activate the ability of Spella on somebody else's turn if you don't want to do it on yours. Then we also have ways to untap creatures, such as Quest for Renewal. 2 mana, 1 and a green for an enchantment that says, whenever a creature you control becomes tapped, you may put a quest counter on this. As long as there are 4 or more quest counters on it, untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step. So you tap your creature to make a rock or to activate its ability, and then on somebody else's turn, it'll untap, and you can activate the abilities again if you have the mana to do so. One of the fun things about making all these different mana rocks with your commander is that they're artifacts, and we have an unwinding clock. This is a 4 mana artifact. It says untap all artifacts you control during each other player's untap step. So at the beginning of each person's turn, you're going to untap all your artifacts and be able to use them for anything you can do at instant speed. Now, what if we did all 3 of those at once? We have the Seedborn Muse. This is a 5 mana creature. It's a 2/4 spirit. Untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. So not only do we hit the lands, not only do we hit the artifacts, not only do we hit the creatures, we do them all at once on every player's turn. Very, very powerful card. This is a bit of a lightning rod for removal because it enables a lot of things very quickly. Now, one of the riskier things to put into play, Curse of Bounty. This is a 2 mana enchantment, 1 in a green, or a curse. You're going to enchant a player with this. Whenever the enchanted player is attacked by anybody, untap all permanents you control. Each opponent attacking that player also untaps all non-land permanents that they control. That's a scary proposition because you give the opponent's ability to do that as well. 2 out of the 3 of them. That being said, sometimes the juice is worth the squeeze. Now, we've talked about the untappers. We also have a pretty decent suite of card draw. It's actually only a couple of cards now that I think about it, because we mostly use the commander, but one of the best ones is Idol of Oblivion. This is a 2 mana artifact. It says tap, draw a card, activate only if you've made a token this turn, which whenever we can, we're going to be doing with our Icy Manaless. And then it also says pay 5 mana and tap it. I'm sorry, 8 mana. It looked like a 5 from where I was at. It didn't sound right. Pay 8 mana, tap it, sacrifice it, create a 10/10 colors Eldrazi creature token. Not super relevant, but good in a backup plan. And we also have the Beast Whisperer. This is a 4 mana creature, 2 green for a 2/3 elf druid. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Now this is important because it doesn't say when a creature enters, it says when you cast. Meaning, if you use Primal Surge, you're not going to draw yourself to death with all the creatures entering. It's only when you cast, which you could do with Spella's second ability as well. And then we also have a bit of a hybrid card that you'll see in a lot of my green decks. Zendikar Resurgent. This is a 7 mana enchantment, 5 green, and it says whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. If you tapped a land to make a green, you make 2 green. You can't choose to tap a red-green land for red and green. It has to be one that you've already made. However, if you have a land that makes 2 mana when you tap it, you get to add 1 more of any of that type that you made. It also has the second ability, whenever you cast a creature card, draw a card. Very similar to the Beast Whisperer. And again, our commander does cast things with their second ability. And then, other than the Icy Manalith token plan, we have other ramp cards, such as our Solemn Simulacrum. This is a 4 mana creature. It's a 2/2 artifact, Golem. And then, when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And whenever this dies, you draw a card. We have the Wood Elves, 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 1/1 elf scout. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a forest card, not a basic forest, a forest card, and put it onto the battlefield and shuffle. It doesn't come in tapped, it comes in untapped. These are relevant facts. Helps out quite a lot when you can make that work for yourself. And then we also have things like the classic Soul Ring. Helps you get there. We have the Sakura Tribe Elder. I'm sorry, I should have gone over Soul Ring. 1 mana artifact that says tap it to add 2 mana to your mana pool. That mana is colorless though. Then we have Sakura Tribe Elder, 1 and a green for a 1/1 Snake Shaman. You can sacrifice it to go search your library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. Then we also have the Commander Sphere. This is a 3 mana artifact. Tap it to add 1 mana of any color that's in your commander's color identity, In this case, it's red-green. And then you can sacrifice it to draw a card. Then we also have our Arcane Signet, 2 mana, tap it, and add 1 mana of any color to that's in our commander's color identity. It's like a smaller version of the Commander Sphere without the draw ability. And then one of the fun ones that works well with this deck is our Horizon Stone. 5 mana artifact. Whenever you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless instead. What that means is that as long as you control this artifact, that mana does not leave your pool, it just becomes colorless. Meaning you can bank mana across different turns. So at somebody else's end step, if you float all the mana between your artifacts and your lands and everything, it'll stay in your pool as colorless as you enter your turn, and you can use it whenever you need. Very, very, very powerful and very, very handy. And then we also have from here a lot of utility. That's the bulk of the deck. We're going to try to go over it quickly because it's kind of whatever you want it to be. There's some cards that are pretty ubiquitous as to what people put in this kind of deck, but for the most part, this is whatever you got. This is your toolbox, so to speak. So we have things like Shaper's Sanctuary. This is a 1 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, draw a card. Sandworm Convergence. This is a 8 mana enchantment, 6 green. Creatures with flying can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. Beginning of your end step, create a 5/5 green worm creature token. And then we have the Lightning Greaves. This is a 2 mana artifact equipment. It says equip for 0. An equipped creature has haste and shroud. Meaning it cannot be targeted by abilities or spells, yours or otherwise. Then we have the Terastodon. This is a 8 mana, 6 green, 9/9 elephant. And when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent that was put into the graveyard this way, create a 3/3 elephant creature token. That's sometimes giving it to other people, sometimes you're giving it to yourself, depends on what you need. And then we have the Rampaging Balos. This is 4 green, 6 mana for a 6/6 beast. It's got trample, and it says landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. Then we have the Archetype of Endurance, 8 mana, 6 green for a 6/5 enchantment boar. Creatures you control have hexproof. Creatures your opponents control lose and can't have hexproof. And then we have From Beyond, one of my favorite enchantments in the game. A very underplayed card in my opinion. 4 mana, 3 and a green for an enchantment. It's devoid, meaning it's colorless. So it's actually not a green spell. Or a green permanent, I should say. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token into play. And it has, you could sacrifice it to add 1 mana to your mana pool. It also has a bonus ability of pay 1 and a green and sacrifice this to search your library for an Eldrazi card, reveal it, put it to your hand, and shuffle. We only have, I think, 1 in the deck, so that's not super relevant, but it's a good insurance if we need it to be. Mostly it's there to help ramp with the little creatures. And we have another card that's a pet card of mine. This is Thrashing Brontodon. 3 mana, 1 green for a 3/4. I love a 3 mana 3/4. It's a dinosaur, and it says pay 1 mana and sacrifice this to destroy target artifact or enchantment. And then we have Swiftfoot Boots. This is a 2 mana artifact equipment. It equips for 1 mana, and the equipped creature gets haste and hexproof, meaning it can't be targeted by your opponents. And then we have the Battle Mage's Bracers. This is a 3 mana card, 2 and a red for a artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets haste, and most importantly, Whenever an ability of the equipped creature is activated, if it's not a mana ability, you may pay 1 mana. If you do, copy that ability. You may choose new targets, and it equips for 2. For Spella, both of these are relevant. So if you pay 4 mana, you get 2 Icy Manaless. If you pay 9 mana, you get to look at the top 4 twice and cast something for free. Super duper relevant. And then we have Kozilek the Great Distortion. That's right, we have a second Eldrazi in here. I always forget. So 10 mana, 8 and 2 colorless. Has to be colorless to spend to cast that for that mana cost. You get a 12/12 legendary Eldrazi, and whenever you cast this card, you may draw cards equal to make your hand equal to 7. So however many you have in hand, you draw cards equal to make it 7. If you have more than 7, you draw 0. If you have less than 7, you draw enough to make it 7. And that's on cast. So even if it gets countered, or whatever the case may be, you will always get that effect. And then it has Menace, meaning it can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures. And then, weirdly, that's a control card. You can discard a card, and if its mana cost is X, counter target spell with random mana cost X. What that realistically means is if your opponent casts a 4 mana spell, you can discard a card with converted mana cost 4 to counter that spell. Same thing with any other mana value or mana cost, whatever you want to say, in your hand. So if they target your things with or if they try to board wipe you or whatever the case may be, you can discard a card with the same mana cost and counter that spell or ability. Or spell. Not ability. Wouldn't work on an ability. And then we have Mirage Mirror. This is a 3 mana artifact. You can pay 2 mana to make it become a copy of an artifact, creature, or enchantment, or land until end of turn. It's one of the most versatile cards ever printed. And in this deck, it usually becomes one of the things that untaps things. Like our creatures that untap things, or the Unwinding Clock, should we need to utilize that ability twice. I lied again. Holy crap. We have more Eldrazi in here than I realized, because I forget that World Breaker is an Eldrazi. This is 7 mana, 6 and a green for a 5/7 Eldrazi with Devoid, meaning it's not actually a green permanent, it's colorless. And it says, when you cast this, again, regardless of whether or not it gets countered or whatever, it is on cast, so it also triggers off of Zvella, not the Primal Surge. Whenever you cast this creature, exile target artifact, enchantment, or land. It has reach, and then I have to read because the text is so small. 2 and a specifically colorless, and sacrifice a land. You may return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Recursive, good at destroying 3 relevant permanent types, and sneaky reach, and it's a big boy. Love to see it. And then we have Burgeoning. This is a 1 mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent plays a land, you may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, that doesn't count towards them ramping, if I believe. It's only if they play a land from their hand as the 1 per turn or 2 per turn, whatever it is, if they use that normal game action, not if they're ramping, I believe. We have one of the scariest cards I've ever seen in my life with a wall of text on it that I'm going to try to decipher as concisely as possible because the wording's a little bit confusing. But it's a 6 mana or a green for a 6/6. This is Kodama of the East Tree. It's a legendary spirit with another sneaky reach. It also has partner, so meaning it could be your commander as well as another card with partner. Now, to simplify what this says before just reading it, if you were to put something into play, if it wasn't put into play with this card's ability, you could put a card from your hand into play if it has less value, mana value. Was it equal or less? Hold on. Equal or less. It's even better every time. equal or less mana value from your hand into play. Meaning, if I, let's say, cast this World Breaker while I control my Kodama of the East tree, when this enters the battlefield, I can put anything from my hand that's 7 mana or less, including lands, because lands count as 0, into play. That is incredibly powerful. There's a lot of things you could do. It lets you ramp, it lets you cast permanents for free, basically, without the cast trigger. It just puts them directly into play from your hand. Incredibly powerful. Very, very sneaky card. And then we have one of my personal favorites, Omnath, Locus of Rage. I actually have a deck built around this card entirely, but this is a 7 mana, 3 red, green, 5/5 legendary elemental. This is landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token. And then whenever this or another elemental you control dies, this creature deals 3 damage to any target. When you play this, you're going to be putting lots of lands into play more often than not. So you're going to make a lot of dudes. And not only does that trigger the Warstorm Surge whenever this or another elemental enters the battlefield, but also if they ever die for any reason, that leads to a lot of damage. Omnath is a scary card. And then similar to the bracer we saw earlier, this is Rings of Brighthearth. This is a 3 mana artifact, and it says, whenever you activate an ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2 mana to copy it. And you can choose new targets. So again, you can make 2 mana rocks, or you can look at the top 4 and cast something for free twice. Then we have Verdant Force. This is a 8 mana, 5 green, 7/7 elemental. Beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 green sapling creature token. Not the most relevant, but it's a big dude with lots of power. And if we get it into play off of Svella's ability on somebody else's turn, you can basically, or any turn really, because it's each upkeep. So for each player's turn, you're going to make a green sapling token. Nice little chump blocker. Nice thing to just keep generating value, but also it's a big boy. And then we have a card that I think very few decks can make work well, and this is definitely one of them. Sunbird's Invocation. I love this card when it was in Standard, so I'm glad I could find a home for it. 6 mana, 5 and a red, for an enchantment that says, whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards from your library, where X is that spell's mana value. You may cast spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest at the bottom in a random order. It's pseudo Cascade. So Cascade says it has to be less mana value than the one you're casting, but it can dig infinitely until it finds it, whereas this, it has to be X or less, but it can only look at the top X to do so. It's a weird card, but it's very cool and potentially very, very powerful. Then we have Panharmonicon, one of the strongest cards to ever be printed. 4 mana for an artifact that says, if a artifact or creature entering the battlefield would cause a triggered ability of a permanent you control, do it again. So, Omnath, not quite relevant. However, what is it called? Warstorm Surge, very relevant. Creature enters the battlefield, trigger a permanent ability, do it again. It's niche as to what it triggers sometimes, or what can trigger it. However, it can double up on a lot of very relevant things. Speaking of which, we have Verdant Sun's Avatar. This is a 7 mana, 5 green for a 5/5 dinosaur avatar. Whenever this or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And with Pandanomicon, you'll gain that life twice. Then we have Grim Gully. This is a card that I'm glad I could find a home for because I was having trouble finding something in my decks that would be relevant for it. This is a 1 red green 3/3 legendary Goblin Shaman. And it says each other non-human creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1 counter on it. It makes our big boys even bigger. Most of the cards in the deck are not human, so that's relevant. And then we have Nissa, Vastwood Seer. This is a 3-mana creature, 2 and a green for a 2/2 legendary elf scout. And it says when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a for a basic forest, and then reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more, exile this and return it transformed, which it becomes Nissa, Sage Animist. This is a 3 loyalty planeswalker, and it says +1, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, you may put it into the battlefield. Otherwise, draw that card. I'm sorry, it says put it into your hand. It does not specify draw because that would be relevant. And then -2, put a 4/4 green, legendary 4/4 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield named Ashaya. And then -7, untap untap up to 6, not all of them, up to 6 target lands you control. They become 6/6 elemental creatures, and they're still lands. Actually, it doesn't have to be ones you control, which is interesting. Surprisingly relevant. But I like this card a lot. I've been using it for a very long time. And then we have Goreclaw, Terror of Calsigma, sorry. This is a 4-mana legendary bear. Jesus, my brain is broken. 4-mana, 4/3 legendary bear. Says creature spells you control with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast. And whenever this creature attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and trample until end of turn. Another fun trample enabler, and it makes things cheaper. And then we have the Loaming Shaman. Now, this is in here for a very specific reason. When we do our Primal Surge, we don't want to go too hard, because if somebody makes us draw when we have an empty library from putting all of the cards onto the battlefield, that can make us lose the game. So worst case scenario, when this enters the battlefield, we could shuffle up to shuffle any number of target cards from our graveyard into the deck so that we don't mill out ideally. It's very niche, but that's kind of what most of these cards are, is just your toolbox of shit to keep you alive or keep the game going or to end the game. That's pretty much the entire reason it's in here, but it's a 3-mana 3/2 otherwise, and it's a Centaur Shaman. But yeah, when it enters the battlefield, target player shuffles any number of target cards from his or her graveyard into their library. Relevant. And there's the Eldrazi I was thinking of the entire time, Artisan of Kozilek. This is a 9-mana 10/9 Eldrazi, and whenever you cast it, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It also has Annihilator 2. For the purposes of being me, I will never swing with this creature unless the person has an incredibly wide token board or something. I hate when somebody hits me with Annihilator, so I try my best to not do it to anybody else. So even when I'm ending the game, I'll probably either only do it because it's like it doesn't matter, you're going to die anyway, or I'll hold this back. But I'm not the guy to get this out early as hell and then start swinging it to make everybody start sacking things. It's not how I like to play. And then we have the Rites of Flourishing. This is a 3-mana enchantment. Beginning of each player's draw step, they draw an additional card, and everybody can play an additional land on each of their turns. This is a symmetrical effect that helps you and everybody else. Then we have Savage Ventmaw. This is a 6-mana creature, 4 red-green for a 4/4 with flying. It's a dragon. And whenever it attacks, you can add 6 mana, 3 red, 3 green to your mana pool. Until end of turn, this mana does not empty from your mana pool as steps and phases end. So it's a interesting, aggressive ramp card, essentially. Then we have one of the stronger cards of the deck, Avenger of Zendikar. 7 mana, 5 green for 5/5 elemental. When it enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 plant creature token for each land you control. And then it also has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on each plant creature you control. My brain broke there. So when it enters, make a plant for each land you have, and then when you play a land with this on the field, all the plants that you own get +1 counters. And we have a card that I don't see anybody play nearly enough, but it's a very scary, strong card. This is Lurking Predators. 6 mana, 4 green for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, any sort of casting of a spell, reveal the top card of your library. You may put a creature card on the if it's a creature, you can put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. Or put the card at the bottom. Good lord. I'm thinking of the other one that's similar. Nissa. So, let's try that again. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature, put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, put it at the bottom. Very, very relevant for lots of the big spells to just get onto the battlefield for free. And then we have Etali, Primal Storm. This is 6 mana, 4 red for a 6/6 legendary Elder Dinosaur. Whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, yours and everybody else's. You may cast any number of them without paying their mana costs. Value. As long as you don't hit all lands, you're going to end up with some good stuff. And then we have Acidic Slime. This is a 5 mana 2/2 ooze with Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, destroy a target artifact, enchantment, or land. And then we have Eternal Witness. This is 3 mana, 1 green for a 2/1 human shaman. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. And last of these utility cards, we have the Wayward Swordtooth. This is a 3 mana card. It's a dinosaur and it's a 5/5 for 2 and a green. It has Ascend, meaning if you have 10 permanents, you get the City's Blessing. And whenever you may play a land. Let's try this again. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. And then as long as you have the City's Blessing, it can attack and block. Otherwise, you can't. And lands count towards that. It's 10 permanents or more. And from there, all we have left to look at is the lands. We have a handful of basics and non-basics in here. Quite a few basics, but we'll go through the non-basics pretty quickly. Jund Panorama. This is a land that taps a colorless, or you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to search your library for a mountain, forest, or swamp that's a basic and put it on the battlefield tapped. For us, we can't get the swamp, but we can get the mountain or forest. And then we have the Highland Forest. This is our snowland. It's a mountain and a forest, which is relevant, and it's a snowland, and it taps for red and green, and enters the battlefield tapped. We have Command Tower, adds 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. For us, red-green. We have Game Trail. When it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a forest or a mountain. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. And then you can tap for red or green. And then another red-green land. When it enters the battlefield, enters tapped unless you control 2 or fewer lands. And then we have Cinderglade. This is another typed land. It's a mountain forest. Taps for red or green, and enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. And then we have the Tree of Tales. This is actually an artifact land, and it taps for a green. Irrelevant for the things that untap artifacts. And we have Ash Barrens. This land taps for colorless, but more often than not, you're going to take it from your hand and discard it, and pay 1 to go search your library for a basic land and put it into your hand. And then we have Raging Ravine. This enters the battlefield tapped, and you can add red or green. And then you can pay 4 mana, 2 red green until end of turn. It becomes a 3/3 red and green elemental creature token. And it says whenever this creature attacks, put a +1 counter on it. And it's still a land. And then we have Reliquary Tower. This is a land that taps for colorless, and it says you have no maximum hand size. And then one of my personal favorite cards, Blighted Woodland. This is a land that taps for colorless. You can pay 3 and a green to tap it and sacrifice it. Search your library for 2 basic lands, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. And then we have the Carplusian Forest. This is a pain land, so it taps for colorless. Or if you let it deal 1 damage to you, it can deal, or so you can make a red or a green. And then we have our Gruul Turf. This is our bounce land. It enters the battlefield tapped. And when it enters the battlefield, you may return so you have to return a land card you control to your hand. But when this taps, it taps for both red and green, not red or green. And then we have Mossfire Valley. This is a weird one because you have to pay mana to make 2 mana. So essentially it's a filter. But for 1 mana, you can tap it to add a red and a green. Very relevant if you only have, say, just green and you need a red. Or just green, red and you need a green. You could filter in. We have the other artifact land in the deck that's colored. This is the Great Furnace. And it taps for red. Temple of Abandon. This comes into play tapped, and when it enters, you can scry 1, meaning you can take a look at the top card of your library, choose to keep it on top, or put it on bottom. And it taps for red or green. And then we have our basic lands, which is 13 forests and 9 mountains. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the deck. If you liked anything you saw, make sure you hit that button. If you disliked it, hit that one. If you have any comments as to questions for why the card is in the deck or any other sort, let me know. There's lots of things that we can put into the deck. Lots of upgrades. This was built on a budget, though. Kind of on a budget. I basically took cards that I had and put them in the deck that are still kind of expensive, like the Seedborn Muse and the Burgeoning. However, I already opened those from Commander decks and other products and whatnot, so I didn't have to buy them. Other cards that I would have put in here are things like the Apex Devastator, which says Cascade, 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 Cascade. Maybe another Cascade. Things like that are big and powerful cards. I also didn't want to put a lot of Eldrazi and things in. I put a few, but they're some of the more mediocre Eldrazi, not some of the oppressive Eldrazi, and that was on purpose. I've actually gotten rid of most of them because I don't want to play them. There's a lot of cards that I could put in here that I've chosen not to. I opened a Blightsteel Colossus while I already had this deck and said, nah, we're not going to be that guy. So there's lots of things I could put in here to upgrade it, and I probably will be upgrading this with a few things because we've gotten more Commander decks and more things over time. So we'll probably upgrade it at some point, but not with anything too crazy. That being said, if you like this content and want to see more like it, you can subscribe. We have a playlist with all my other deck techs, and we put these out at the moment every 2 weeks. If you want to see gameplay of this and my other decks, we play on Spell Table on Twitch for Darker Monster Twitch every Saturday night, and we do arena gameplay on Mondays. I think that's just about it. And make sure you like, comment, subscribe if that's what you're inclined to do, because they all greatly help the channel grow, and I'm trying to get this thing off the ground. If you have a suggestion for any other content you want to see, make sure to let me know down below. And if you want to see this deck list and others that I've made, the Moxfield link will be in the description below. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you, and I will catch you guys later.